Hi, Chris Mc Loone here with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. Welcome to this episode of our I screwed it up again. I keep wanting to say webcast. Sorry. 3, 2, 1. Hi, Chris Mc Loone here with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. Welcome to this episode of our podcast. We have a couple of returning people with us today. We have Nick Wilbur again and Win Slauch. They are both going to talk to us today about aerials and platforms. Now, this is a topic that we've covered in various ways in the past, but most of the time it's been what is available. What is available? We've gotten a little bit into the differences between the two different types of apparatus, but we haven't really. Today we're going to dive into a little bit more of where to start. We're going to talk about specification considerations that need to be made as you're doing this. Most people who are purchasing a ladder have done it before, or a truck company vehicle have done it before. But there are an awful lot of people out there who are just speccing a ladder for the first time, or who might be considering moving from one version to another. So that's what we're going to talk about today, fellas. Thank you very much for joining me again. Want to get started right off the bat here, Nick. I'm going to start with you. For a department that is purchasing its first ladder, where do they start? And I shouldn't say ladder because, and maybe go through some of the nomenclature too, because we call these things all kinds of things. Some people consider an aerial just what some of us would call a straight stick. Some of us, when some of us think of them as towers, we'll call them a tower ladder. But other people think of the articulating booms as a tower. So we might refer to them by their brand names as Squirt or something like that. But some people consider those water towers. So get into just where do they need to start, and where they need to start might be deciding defining the type of rig they're looking for. So I'm sorry, I'll be quiet now, Nick. I'll let you pick up.
Thanks for having us back again. Definitely appreciate the time to talk about this. I think the big thing that we can talk about is when we say truck, that just means truck and covers kind of all of them. That's kind of how I look at it anyway. But the first place, if you're first time buying a ladder or even buying a ladder again, most people are replacing ladder trucks every 30 years or so. There's some fortunate replacing it sooner and some less fortunate replacing it after even more time, is figuring out the mission of the vehicle, and what's kind of going on around you. Looking at your response area to see kind of what's changed. First conversation is, is it going to have a pump in a tank or not? And it's not always required to have a pump in a tank. And just because it has a pump in a tank doesn't mean it has to fit the most amount of water that you can fit on a fire truck ever, either. So those are definitely considerations to kind of look at. And then, like the last podcast kind of hits on is the ground ladder complement. What is your area need for ground ladders? And if you start answering some of those questions, you're going to be kind of starting to steer in the right direction of what truck you're going to be able to fit in your firehouse and fit in your first due and be able to fit all the things that you want to accomplish on. And as we kind of go through this podcast, it's going to become very clear if you have water, hose, a pump, and need to carry a bunch of equipment, there's going to be certain vehicles that are going to fit better for your mission, just based on weight and everything else, the dimensions of the vehicle. So I think basically just defining what you want this thing to do. And what people mistake a lot is taking a staffing problem and trying to fix it with a fire truck. We've seen that a lot of places where they get the chance to buy a fire truck and they look and they say, hey, we're only going to get 4 people out the door and 1 rig. Let's throw everything we can on this 1 rig and we're going to make it happen when we get there. And just, remember, you still have to drive this thing. You still have to operate this thing. And, you still want to be successful when you get there. And so, dumping a little bit of money extra there is just going to put you in overweight conditions, harder to drive, not getting into access you need to. It could be making it more difficult for the 4 firefighters that do show up. It's going to do 100 jobs okay, and not really any one of them very well. So I think those are some kind of things to kind of watch out for and consider when you're looking at your purchase.
Win, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think when you look at it from a specification point of view, or just in general, is the first thing is, what's the function of this truck, and that's going to dictate a lot of the other things. And you need to decide that kind of upfront. Is this going to be a true ladder truck where the ground ladders are my priority? Is it going to be a Quinn apparatus where I'm the ladder's there for comfort or for the need if it arises, but it's going to be primarily used as an engine? That's going to dictate a lot of things. And basically what those are going to dictate is what ladders we're going to carry, because how we base the length of the truck, what else, the function is going to dictate the rest of that. And the first thing from a spec point of view is, once you figure that out, is I would want to send my needed ladder complement to whatever builders I'm looking at and say, hey, can you fit these ladders on your ladder truck? And if they can't, they come back and say no, then you're not looking at that builder anymore. And it's the same thing with a pumper. If they can't build your hose bed, if they can't do what needs fit your function, then you're not going to look at that builder and you're going to move on. So now you've started to eliminate some of that. But take that time up front to build in what you need for the function of a ladder truck. And I think, the first thing when you're looking at buying one, or even buying a used one, is that ladder capability, that ladder complement. Can I fit what I need? Whether it's side stacked, whether it's in the torque box, or if I'm buying used, can that used torque box be modified, like we talked about last time, to fit the ground ladder complement I need, as well. I think a couple other things when you're looking at, where do you start with this ladder truck? And it goes back to that function, that pump and tank thing, all that. Again, identify the primary role. If it's going to be an engine with ladder capabilities, then you need the pump, the tank, you need the ability to lay hose line. If it's going to be a ladder that just happens to have a pump on it if you need it, do you really need to cross lace? Do you need to lay supply line? Do you need both sides of the pump panel? Or is it just there as a nicety, or to cover yourself if you get put in a situation where, hey, pulling a line might be the better option? So again, can we cut half of this stuff out and make this a true ladder truck with a little bit of engine functions? I think along with that, identifying those needs helps you identify the weight, what you need to carry. And when you identify the primary function of that apparatus, then you can identify, how you're going to build your compartments out, where things are going to go, and identify, the overall weight of the equipment that you're going to carry with your primary function, and then filter any other stuff as we go on. So, as I'm looking at buying a ladder truck, that's kind of where I'm looking at starting. Is number one, what is the primary function? And then I'm going right into that ladder tunnel and getting the ladders that I need first to provide, what's necessary, and then building the rest of the truck around that.
Now, speaking of that ladder tunnel, both of you, as you were talking, what really struck me was some of the personnel factors that go into this. Nick, you mentioned, if there's only 4 people, that are going to staff the truck, you have to kind of design it, around that. Sometimes departments decide to throw everything, in the kitchen sink in there. When we think about when we think about the ladder tunnel, and we think about, the ladder complement, the question I have is, do you, in the consulting work that you do you see departments specifying the 45 to 50 foot ladders as often anymore? And if not, is that because of they want a shorter truck and it's because of that? Is it because they just don't have enough personnel to really put them up anymore? Is it because, they just, nobody wants to put up I mean, it could be, that they just don't even want to go through that whole process. I mean, when I went through firefighting 1, and this is, 30 years ago, so it's a ways off, we did learn, we drilled on how to raise a 50-foot ladder, but not everybody is doing that now. So like as you go through and you're helping fire departments spec their rigs, spec their ladder trucks, are they still going for those 45 to 50s, or are they falling out of favor?
A lot of times when we're involved in the process, there's a higher percentage that they're going to go with that 40, 45, 50-foot ladder. And again, it's just opening up their eyes to see the need for that type of ladder. And, with the ladder podcast, we talked about it on our last podcast, assessing that area. And a lot of areas, you'd be surprised, probably need it. When we start talking about different ladder trucks, and you start, making mid-mounted ladder trucks, that cuts into some of the torque box and some of your area to store ground ladders. So that 45 or that 50 is using a lot of prime real estate up on the ladder truck and specifically the torque box. So it becomes a very difficult decision on a mid-mounted, apparatus, whatever truck you're going to specify with that. On a rear mount, you have a little bit more space because you can side stack and things like that, but it goes back to that mission of the vehicle. Staffing definitely plays a role into it. But I said it last podcast, I'll say it 100 times. If you don't have the ladder with you, you'll never be able to use it. So if the need is there, you need to bring it with you to the call. And so I think it's starting to kind of come back a little bit. You'll see, tiller trucks are coming back a little bit. You see more and more people buying them. And that opens up the possibilities a whole lot to have more ground ladders. And so you see them kind of peaking back up on tiller trucks. And so you kind of see them there. But overall, I think there's still a big gap where there could be more, and there should be more.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't know that they need them. I think that's what it comes into. And until you have somebody come in and point it out that hey, you have these houses built into hills or apartment buildings built into hills, colleges that are 4 or 5 stories tall, that have walkable campuses. Towns now have walkable campuses with these, whatever we're calling these, mid-rise hot buildings with, commercial and then 4 stories of wood frame on top of them. I think people just don't know that they need them. And I know when we built our ladder truck here, where I volunteer, it was a compromise. We had a 45-foot ladder with poles on it. And in order to get everything else, we had to compromise, and we had to drop down to a 40-foot ladder with no poles. So we've taken away some of the mechanical advantage, and we took away a little bit of the height capabilities, but we still needed that extra, a little bit longer than that 35, that kind of mid-range ladder in our first do. Now we since burnt most of the town down and don't really need it as much anymore, but it's still nice to know that we have it. And that was that compromise that we had to fight and put in, as we were building that truck, is how can we still make the best out of this situation, knowing what we really need, but also, covering the stuff that we need most of the time, not just for those, once in a life fires downtown.
Before we get into the mid mount and the rear mount and the platform and the straight stick, real quick, I just wanted to go into the reasoning for going with a tandem axle versus a single rear axle. I'm not in a ladder company, but I do run with a rescue company, and whenever we are speccing out a new rescue truck, that single versus tandem always comes into play. Now, for us, it's because of the weight and some of the braking advantages that you have with a tandem, but also when we talk about ladder trucks, when we talk about trucks, sometimes that is because the truck needs to come down a little bit, and the only way to reduce that height is to make it a little longer. Just talk in your travels and in from where you're coming from when you're speccing these things out, what goes into determining the tandem rear versus the single rear axle?
I think there's a lot of things that come into it. And again, it goes back to what's the function of the truck going to be. And that's going to dictate a lot of it. Weight is going to dictate, whether we go with that tandem axle or that single axle, really. And at some point, we're going to get over the weight capabilities of that single rear axle. Obviously, there's been some changes in the way certain manufacturers are building their ladders, which have removed a lot of the weight off of them, allowing for single axle rear mount towers now and single axle 100 plus foot ladder trucks versus just the old 75-foot quints that we were all used to. But basically, again, your pump, your tank size, your ladder complement, your weight, of the equipment that you plan on carry is going to dictate all of that. You know, the other things that you have to look at is are you limited on size in your firehouse? Are you responding to an older community that has smaller roads that require tighter turning radiuses? You know, the tandem axles are going to, you know, perform better if you're on if you have steep hilly terrain where your brake capabilities are going to be, you know, need to be increased with all that. Having that extra set of brakes is going to help that, things like that. The cost is going to dictate it. You know, one axle is going to be lower cost than two axles, both up front. And then potentially you also have to look at the overall cost of the apparatus throughout its lifespan. Is what is that overall maintenance cost going to cost? You know, is there, we talk, you know, there's a lot of people say that it's kind of gets hit or miss on whether the second axle increases or decreases your brake wear. And again, I think that all kind of depends on weight. So you have to weigh that in and what we're going to pay, you know, kind of overall in that function.
Yeah, I think, you know, to hit kind of what Win was saying with the weight, you know, the axles have definitely improved. The technology for the ladders have improved. But just because we have a bigger axle and we can throw more weight on it doesn't mean we should. That's the other thing, too, to consider. You know, I think that you have a shorter overall length on a single axle. You can do that. And that's, you know, that's definitely a pretty big advantage. But, you know, for my preference for the everyday fire truck, I think the tandem axle definitely kind of wins out on that. Just again, stability, being able to get places. If you are to leave, you know, the paved path and have to go into some, you know, gravel or, you know, off even just into the dirt or, you know, not a regular road surface to position the ladder truck, you have more surface area now where you're distributing the weight with a tandem axle. So it allows you to get into those spaces a little bit better. And with NFPA changing the pressure that the ground pads are able to, or the aerial, I guess, the outriggers are able to put into the ground with the ground pads, that kind of equates out to that tandem axle weight rating, I guess I should say. You know, single axle, it's still going to be kind of comparable, but that's kind of the thought process. If you can drive the truck out there, you can kind of set it up and be able to operate. Again, you still have to check your conditions. That's not a blanket statement. You know, no, there's never a blanket statement in the fire service, right? You still have to be educated and know what you're doing. But I think that's kind of another consideration. Snow, all the other things, you know, access with snow, being able to lock those axles out with the differentials and stuff. I mean, there's a lot that kind of goes into that decision making. But like Win said, it really comes down to weight and drivability.
So we've gotten to the point where, so we started out, we looked around, we took a look at the district, we decided how, the number and the full, the full complement of ground ladders we want to do. Forgetting about the tandem in the rear for just a second, but that's where we're at. So now, when we look at truck purchasing, we also need to get into whether or not to go with a rear mount or a mid mount, and then actually, and the next question would be, platform versus straight stick, and it kind of goes, which one do you pick first? But I think really, the mid mount versus the rear mount is what needs to go next because of the overall length and things like that you get into. If you have a short firehouse, that might end up determining right off the bat before you even have to get started that you need to go with one over the other. So when we get into rear mount versus mid mount, what criteria should departments use to help them make that decision? Keeping in mind, that, like you just said, it all depends. It all depends. There's no hard and fast rule for any of this, but what are some of the things that you would suggest they consider for that decision? Nick, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of look at the operational side. I think more specifically, I mean, it's going to dabble into the spec side, but that's kind of Win's wheelhouse on that side. But I think the mid mount versus rear mount, you have to look at what you're going to use the vehicle for. If you're going down main town USA, going down to these tight city streets, and you have multiple storefronts to operate at, the mid mount is going to be better, right? And there's drawbacks with that too. The mid mount is going to have probably more sections to the aerial. So when you go off to the side of the rig, it's going to be a little bit tighter. You're going to be around that 25-foot mark to be able to use off the side. If you spec it right and the vehicle was manufactured correctly, depending on the manufacturer, you should be able to get down to the ground, or at least lower down to the ground, to use that in a, in that vertical or that horizontal plane, that lower horizontal plane, so that you can put water into the fire at a higher GPM, and kind of use it as an offensive weapon. The hard part is jack stance, right? So where are your jacks going to be deployed? How far out do they get deployed? Because that changes based on where that turntable is going to be. Just the location of the jacks, right? Is it going to be easier or harder to see it from the front seat as you're looking in your mirrors, right? And again, there's tips and tricks depending on where your outriggers are. And as you use the vehicle more, you'll get more comfortable with it. All that stuff kind of applies. But again, you have to look at your drivers. How are they going to be able to operate? And will they be able to use those things to their advantage, and what the rest of the fleet looks like? If you go to some places, they have just tiller trucks or rear-mounted towers, and that's it. And that's a difficult transition, right, from a mid-mounted tiller truck basically to that rear-mounted tower. Well, if you just did all mid-mounts, right, maybe that's a better training thing. So that kind of all goes into that operational thing. For rear mounts, I think about, kind of speed and ease, right? And again, I'm used to operating more off of a rear mount, so I'm a little bit biased there. But as you go, you can nose into structures, operate straight off the front. It's not, the mid-mounted aerial is not tucked in behind the cab where you don't have that same operational capability off the front and the back. But it does usually have less sections and longer sections. So you're at that 3 to 38 foot range for that aerial bedded. So that's a lot more room you need to position away from a building to be able to get down low below that 0 degree plane. But if you're operating high rises, things like that, it gives you great access. That turntable is a little bit higher, so you have higher compartments to store things, more ladders if you wanted to store ladders. But again, it goes back to that firehouse, right? Is it going to fit in or is it not? Last thing to kind of consider is that angle of approach and departure. For that mid-mount, sometimes it pushes that length out to where the angle of approach and departure becomes difficult for some of these older firehouses with steep ramps. We've seen that in kind of Arlington with some of our rigs. Some of those ramps, because of drainage and everything else, they wanted to be pretty steep. You have issues where it's kind of snagging at the end when you're pulling in and out. And obviously there's the NFPA 8 degree minimum, but that might not be what you need. So you need to consider that as well. Win?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the other things that you miss there, and I'm surprised, but it's looking at your neighboring departments when you're looking at purchasing your apparatus. Are you duplicating, what your neighbors have when you should be working together and in tandem to make sure that you have the multiple types of aerials that'll cover everybody's district? Like Nick said, if you're in a primarily commercial or storefront district, that tower might be a better option. But if there's single family dwellings, things like that, further out where you're going to have to make sure that you have that reach. If you're going through trees, things like that, where the narrower rear mount aerial might be better versus the bucket. I guess we're not quite into that conversation here yet, but these are all things to look at. The other thing is understanding the scrub area of your apparatus and how one might be better than the other. If you have the ability for that mid-mount tower or mid-mount ladder truck of whatever type to be in the center of the building all the time, then you're good to go. If for some reason you get blocked out or you're coming in late for whatever reason and you're going to be farther down the street, then a mid-mount aerial might not be able to swing around and get the cab of the truck out of the way, whereas the rear mount has the ability to work over the front of it, or has a better scrub area, depending on the way you set your truck up with the compartments and the cab and all of that. So again, I think you got to look at where that truck's going to be in your run response, and then what else neighbor wise you have, and how you're looking at that protection of the area as a whole.
Talk about the scrub area real quick. Just kind of define that, what it is, and why it's important when you're making these calls.
So the scrub area is basically the area of a building that your aerial ladder can hit from where you're positioned. So it's going to be dictated by where the ladder sits on the truck, and then how you position. Ideally, we want to get the cab out of the way. So on a mid mount or a rear mount, or even a tiller truck, the tiller truck's the best at it because it can jackknife itself entirely out of the way and then open that whole thing up. On a rear mount or a mid mount, but just by angling the front of the truck away, it opens that scrub area up towards the front a little bit more. So if that makes sense, it's that area of what we can carry, or what we can cover on a building. Now we can mess that up. Some ladder trucks are better at it than others, but we can do things as we spec this truck out that messes it up. Different mid-mount manufacturers offer different heights on the body. I know one offers a low, which brings it straight across the bottom. It offers a low high, so it backs up towards the back. Another one just offers a single body configuration. So in some points you're tied with a mid mount. You're tied into being able to work between the cab and work between the body, especially when you're down low. As we get up higher, it clears it out a little bit. And same thing with a rear mount. If we go with a raised roof or we go with a longer cab, then obviously that's going to stop us from being able to come around the front of the aerial. Same thing with a mid mount. A raised roof on a mid mount, you're cutting probably 10 to 20 feet of your scrub area coming down off the front of the truck because of that raised roof. So all of that stuff, if you do full compartment heights that are the same height as the cab coming all the way on the back, you're going to cut the capabilities of your ladder truck out. So all that needs to be looked at, I think when you're deciding between that mid mount and the rear mount. And then, again, once you make that decision, as you're building that truck out, is what are we doing to hurt ourselves as we build this truck?
I think just to add with the scrub area, you got to remember that, 2 or 3 or 4 inches at the truck is feet, right? At the end at 100 feet or 95 feet or 75 feet or 80 feet, depending on how long your aerial device is. So that scrub area, whatever you're doing at the truck, is going to magnify out at the end of the aerial. And again, what you spec as far as mid-mount and rear mount, there's all different lengths and considerations to think about that affect your scrub area too. If you're going to get a 70-foot aerial to a 110-foot aerial, there's a huge difference of what your aerial can reach. So scrub area is obviously the vehicle, the manufacturer, where the turntable is located, mid or rear, and then also length and type of ladder too is all that's going to play into your scrub area before you even set it up on the fire ground.
And one more thing, as we talk about this, and Nick kind of hit on it with the setup of the jack spread, and a little bit with the scrub area too, is that with today's modern computer aided setup capabilities, the ability to short jack and even to operate on the short jack side has been increased to where the computers are going to dictate how far we can go and whatnot. So again, just the fact that you can most operate most new trucks without having the offside outriggers even down, or at least just on the ground, helps decrease, that setup space. And then because you can suck it all the way over to one way, it'll increase your scrub area. The other thing that the new trucks have, or make it a little bit easier, is that you can counter the truck one way, where you set one side of jacks low and the other side super high, which would set the truck on an angle, but then it's going to bring that ladder down lower to allow you to get either lower to the ground or below grade even farther if necessary. And that can be done on a mid mount, or if you're trying to do a storefront attack with a straight stick, it'll allow you to do the same thing. Get it down, get the tip of the aerial to the ground lower, and then get the stream back up into where you want it. So, I think there's a lot of new stuff, new capabilities in the functional ladder trucks that makes this a little bit easier than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago.
So like I was saying before, we're going to decide on the rear mount versus the mid mount, but then we have to get into, are we going straight stick, or are we going platform? And sometimes that decision will come first and will help determine whether you go rear mount or mid mount. I don't see a lot of mid mount straight sticks today being delivered, but they are available, so they are there. I do see platforms, both rear mounted and mid mounted. So it seems like the platform has a little bit more variety there, where but there, again, even on the rear mount platform versus the mid mount platform, there are a lot of different considerations that departments need to make. So now we pretend we've decided that we want to go with one or the other. What is the criterion now that helps fire departments decide whether to go with the platform or to go with a straight stick, maybe a pre-piped straight stick? Nick, I'm sorry, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, I think we could probably both hit this one out of the park here, but I'll take it first. I think really goes, again, to the mission of the vehicle. We're going to say that a million times throughout the day or today, because that really is the most crucial thing. And, going around, we're very fortunate to be invited in. And I didn't really mention it last podcast, but I definitely want to hit it now that when a department invites us in, it's because they're admitting they need help. And that's a huge step that a lot of departments haven't really figured out yet, or haven't really gotten to that point yet. And departments that do bring us in, I mean, they're awesome to work with because they know they need help. They understand it. There is a huge gap in knowledge. And so we're very fortunate that, and you go up to a vehicle and you're like, what's the mission of this vehicle? And they start looking at each other, and it's like, all right, well, that's the first issue we're going to run into here. Right. And so with the ladder truck, there's a lot of things that come into play, and that's the first thing. Like Win was alluding to, right? Are you going to a bunch of commercial buildings, and doing storefront operations? Are you using it as a working platform? For us in Arlington, we have a tower ladder on our technical rescue team, because of the increased weight capacity on there. There's just a lot more you're able to do with a bucket, with the weight capacity, and doing rigging and technical rescue, or fitting a Stokes basket in, right? Different access points, stuff like that. So that's kind of a consideration in there. Water flowing, right? If we're going to be using any sort of water flowing device, nothing beats a tower ladder. That's a huge plus to be able to be up there and operate and see, and be in a safe location. As you get into some of these straight sticks, as you start flowing water, that tip load goes down. And honestly, there's just really not a whole lot of reason to be putting anybody at the end of a tip while you're flowing water, right? If we're up high and we're flowing water, we've already kind of written that structure off, and now we're putting somebody in danger that for nothing, right? We're not really gaining a whole lot out of that. But that's another topic for another day. For aerials, for straight sticks, there's a lot of pluses there. With operation, when I think straight stick, I think speed. And like Win mentioned, with technology, that's kind of equaling out now, right? The tower ladders are becoming faster, but with that increased weight capacity, the outrigger spread is farther. So you have more outrigger to put out, and it has to go farther travel distance. So it's just going to take more time. So straight stick setup and deploying is just quicker. So if you have a lot of, taller roofs that you want to get multiple firefighters up to, access in and out, and you're going to be doing operations like that where you don't need a working platform, the straight stick is definitely the one to go to. With no height considerations or anything like that, the straight stick is a good one. If you need, you have issues with height, the mid-mounted tower or aerial is probably your better bet because it just sits lower. And then tight area, I think, with that rear-mounted straight stick or even mid-mounted straight stick to an extent, you take that 6 foot of bucket out of play. That's a huge thing that you don't have to worry about. And some of these towers have big swings in the back, or you have the 6 foot of bucket hanging off the front. That's a lot to consider when you're driving or operating the vehicle. So those are kind of some of the high points of the tower versus the straight stick. I mean, there's definitely more. We could probably spend a whole entire day going through all those, but I think that's kind of the high points.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think it goes back to, like we said earlier too, is looking at what everybody else has and making sure that you can provide, coverage and capability for everything. Obviously, if you're in a department that has multiple stations, multiple units, maybe multiple trucks, you want to make sure that you're able to provide everything. Each truck doesn't have to do the same functions. You just have to plan for that. If it's a set of strip malls, maybe the rear mount truck, even if it's first due, is going to go to the rear, and the mid mount tower that's coming in second or third due is going to get the front. In case this thing gets away from us, then we can get the ladders down and we can make the right decision based on that. But if you're buying the same type of ladder truck or the same type as your neighbor, then you're going to limit those capabilities. And like Nick said, the big things you're looking at are the work platform, that's on a tower. How are we going to be, do we plan on doing a lot of exterior work that requires us to be in the bucket? And again, I look at a lot of commercials for that building or that type of deal. Single family dwellings, there's not necessarily a whole lot of work that you have to do, off the tip of an aerial. Whereas a commercial building, there might be more with void spaces and things like that where you're doing that work. The water delivery is the other big thing. Is obviously, like Nick said, the tower ladder, either rear mount or mid mount, is the most functional water delivery asset that we have on the fire ground. It puts a whole lot of water in places safely with a work platform that allows those people to do it. And this is one of the big questions that I always ask, especially with tiller trucks, because of what it does for us in length of the truck, overall length of the truck. But do you really need that $15,000-$20,000 waterway that you use maybe 4-5 times, in the life of the truck? Do you need to have that expenditure if your neighbor has a mid mount or a rear mount tower ladder that can function that? So again, it all kind of plays into that is that decision-making process is what's going on around us and what do I need this thing to do?
Well, Win, you just brought it up. So tell us real quick, where do tillers fall into all this? I mean, we've been talking about stray sticks and platforms and mid-mount and rear mount. In this whole discussion about speccing a truck, where do tillers fall into it?
I mean, I think like Nick said, tillers are making a comeback for a lot of reasons. And I think a lot of it has to do cities, towns, everything a lot of them have historic districts that were built around, small paths. If you think of an Italian area in a city or, any big older city has these parts of town that are super small that you're not going to get these big trucks in today. So the tiller capabilities come in there. And then if you look at today's environment with city planning and walkable communities and things like that, roads are getting smaller. The curbs are getting pushed out to decrease traffic, decrease speed. So the tiller is starting to make a comeback because of that ease of maneuverability, the ability to get it in places, out of places, and then when you're there, the ability to position that apparatus with the rear steer axle going forward and going backward is one of those things. I think that's why you're starting to see that come back. I don't just the way that we're trying to fit so much stuff as we build these communities, townhouses, retirement communities, all that kind of stuff is. I think that's where you're going to see that come back. It also, ancillary to that, it gives us a lot of space to carry stuff. So again, if you're looking at combining a rescue and a ladder truck, that's the way to do it. Without overloading and without necessarily taking up the functionality of one versus the other, where you might on definitely on a single axle, even on a tandem axle, whether it's weight or compartment space wise, you're going to start to see your ability to outfit that apparatus in the way you want it to start to be limited. Whereas that tiller truck gives you that functionality. It gives you the functionality to carry a massive amount of ground ladders if you set it upright, along with that equipment. And if you have to, it gives you the pump and a small water tank capability as well. So I think that's why you start to see it come back. So yeah,
Gotta be able to fit them. Gotta be able to fit them in the house. That's part of it too.
Yeah, I think the combination of resources is huge. I mean, we've recommended a couple across the board where it's not necessarily even a space thing. It's a combination of we're going to take a rescue squad that runs very few calls and a ladder truck that runs very few calls, and we're going to make a pretty nice vehicle that's going to run some calls. And again, it just saves you one point whatever $1 million nowadays, and one point whatever $1 million nowadays, and now you're kind of combining it into one and saving hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think the other thing that not everybody wants to talk about all the time is tiller trucks are cool, and that's a huge driver, right? You have a younger fire service coming in. There's a lot of old school things that are coming back, and so I think there's some hesitations that should be taken into tiller trucks as well. I'm a big fan of tiller trucks. I would love to be a tillerman, but, in College Park, we were surrounded by them, right? So when we went to go buy a new truck, we were like, hey, tower, straight truck, what are we doing? Everyone's like, well, why don't we consider a tiller? I'm like, the 3 of the 4 trucks that surround us are tiller trucks. We're just going to get the same thing as them, right? And, my favorite time was when they were talking about that next winter. We were going down the road and there they all were chained up with chains because there's a little bit of snow on the ground and tiller trucks don't like snow at all. And we were very fortunate to not have to chain up because we could get anywhere we needed to get to, right? We have, the weight and the axles and stuff to be able to get that access. So it was a fun time to make fun of them for a quick second. The downside of it's drivers. And I think with today's technology of ladder trucks, with straight trucks or mid mounts, like they're making these vehicles smaller and more compact with better cramp angles, so you can just turn them better. So it's definitely something that you want to look at. And I know there's considerations in the DC area. I mean, there's a lot of people going into tiller trucks, coming out of tiller trucks. That's there's a lot of movement there because the price, is it worth it? Is it not? The areas, they're changing. And so there's a lot of movement in those areas. And I think it's great because that just means people are thinking about it, right? And they're really considering, what do I need? If what I have now is not working, we need to change it. We need to upgrade because we have tighter streets now. We're carrying more equipment, or we need more ground ladders. And those are kind of the big 3 things that you're looking at when you think tiller truck. And they're mid-mounted too, right? So they have their advantages, just like a mid-mounted aerial would.
So when we finally get to this point, now a lot of fire departments, a lot of fire companies, the manufacturers are helping with the specification writing for these, but but there are other departments that do go in that write their own spec and expect the manufacturer to meet it. So once you decide what you're buying, when it comes down to specification considerations, what are some of those considerations? What are you looking? I guess what are some of the one of our writers, Bill Adams, always says, if you didn't write it down, if it's not in writing, it's not there. So what are some of the things that people, when they're writing their specs for any of these vehicles, really need to keep in mind that they need to get this right? As they're going through.
The big thing right off the bat is the weight. You need to specify to the apparatus manufacturer what you anticipate carrying, and give them that weight. NFPA has standards. A pumper, and I won't throw the weights out, but a pumper is normally 2,000 pounds. A ladder truck is 2,500 pounds, and a rescue squad is over 3,000 pounds of equipment. And that's the base number that the manufacturers are going to use when they calculate your weight, when they determine the axle sizes that you need for your fire truck. And if you don't tell them, and they only use the base or the NFPA standard, and you plan on carrying more than that because you have a rescue pumper, or you're going to carry rescue tools and hose and truck company tools on your ladder truck, and you underweight your apparatus, then there's a very good potential that your apparatus is going to be overweight when it comes in. And if you don't tell them, if you don't put in your specifications what weight that you expect them to build this truck to, then it's going to be your fault when it comes in and it's overweight. So I think that's the big thing, is specifying that weight out. the height, the length limitations. You know, you need to give them the wheelbase that you expect it to be, the weight you expect it to be, the height that you expect it to be. And again, that comes in with not only ladder trucks, but what height your hose bed, what height your cross lays are going to be, what's the overall length of the apparatus. And these things have to be measured and checked before you sign a contract for the apparatus. Because, you know, you see it once or twice a year where somebody buys a fire truck and it doesn't fit in their firehouse. That's not the manufacturer's fault when it comes down to it. That's yours. And, you know, so those are the big things. We already talked about the ladder storage and making sure that you specify. We talked about this a little bit last time, what ladders we're putting in this. And especially today, if we're not going to buy the ladders from the manufacturer, making sure that all that equipment is documented in that ladder truck. If there's anything else that you expect outside of the norm for that ladder to do, then you need to call that out in your specification as well. And you know, we can go into this for long periods. A specification for a ladder truck is, 80 to 100 pages of just how you expect it to carry it. Is the motor big enough for it? You know, is it the right transmission? The right tires. Tires can affect your scrub area, or not your scrub area, I'm sorry, but your cramp angle, which will affect the turn radius. The front bumper is going to affect the turn radius. I can just ramble on because there's so much stuff that you have to think about when you spec this truck out, especially if you're going to use your own specifications. And even the manufacturers, if a manufacturer is giving you a specification, they're expecting you to buy that fire truck. And again, that's going to be based on what they want to do and not what you need necessarily. So you have to have the ability to change that specification to what you want and what you need to make it your truck. You know, and again, that's the beauty of being able to write that own specification. You're going to write something, and probably very few manufacturers are going to be able to give it to you 100%. And that's good. You don't necessarily need that, but you want to put on paper what you want and have them come back and say, hey, we can't quite do this, but this is our best option of getting this. But just, again, just be careful. The manufacturer says, oh, this is everything you need right here. You need to make sure you read through that, hit everything, because at the end of the day, when you sign the paper, whatever was written down, like Bill Adams says, is what you're going to end up getting. And it's, it's kind of a manufacturer specification is friendly to the manufacturer and not to the fire department. So.
Yeah. I mean, to kind of add into all that, I mean, that's all 100% right. And I think the last statement there is huge. Your needs assessment is what you need. The manufacturer is going to come in and listen to you for 5 seconds and throw a spec at you. And especially nowadays, and, they're not making that money until 4 years from now, possibly. Right. So, and it's not showing up to their house. It's not going to be something that they call 911 for the most part. Right. So, you have to remember that this is something that for the next 30 years or so, you're going to have to deal with and be able to, foresee what the area is going to need, not even just for today, but for future uses. I think it's always trust but verify, right? Wynn said if it's not written down, that's how they're going to build the truck. Yes and no, right? The final inspection, I mean, we catch them all the time. Every single manufacturer out there that what was written in the spec isn't actually what they built or what they meant to build, or they kind of messed something up along the way. So I think it's just, nowadays with the volume that they're putting out there, you have to verify everything and you have to be in it. And the last thing is just reading the specification, whether you write it, they write it. Before you sign the dotted line, you should have read every single word on that piece of paper, and not just the picture, right? That shows the pretty fire truck. That's not how this works, right? Because there's usually 3 different pieces of paper. One that has the picture on it, right? That gives you some of the dimensions and things. There's that quick list of the components. And then there's the long written specification. And you should have access to all 3 and read all 3 of them. And that's hundreds of pages of documents, but that's what it takes when you sign for $2+ million worth of fire truck. And there's many people that even going into final inspection still haven't read the specification in its entirety and understand what it means. That's the other thing, is understanding it. Just because it's written down, if you don't understand what it means, it's that salesperson or the manufacturer's job to educate you on what it means. So when you're signing that piece of paper, you fully understand what you're signing for. Using some sort of jargon or lingo that you don't understand, or something that's in there that you don't understand, ask for help, and that manufacturer or the salesperson should help you. And I can't say this enough, that ask for help. I mean, if you're speccing a fire truck once every 10 years, once every 5 years, you've never specced a fire truck before, like, stack your corner, get help from somebody that has done it before. That's expertise from us that we would obviously love that, right? But that we love helping people out. We love the business. That's great. But there's other neighboring fire departments that go through it. There's other experts out there that do the same thing. But again, I would caution you, just because they've done it before doesn't mean they did it right. And there's a lot of experts or other people that offer assistance out there that aren't doing it necessarily the right way. So do your research into them too. And I hate to be that Debbie Downer that says, don't trust anybody, right? But that's kind of where we're at today. There's a lot of money involved in this, and a lot of time that this apparatus has to last you to consider in that. And again, it's just doing the work. And I think with today's fire service, that's the hardest thing. There's so many avenues that fire departments are being pulled, that the apparatus specification kind of just like, oh, someone throws something down that looks pretty good, and a neighboring fire department signed on with something similar. Let's just sign and do it. Because it's another checklist item that's off the list, without truly understanding what you need and doing a real good needs assessment. I mean, we see it in Arlington. I mean, we're buying so many rigs so quickly that it's hard to keep up and actually assess what we need sometimes, because, hey, we just bought a rig, 2 years ago, or signed a contract a year ago. Let's send it again. And so it's hard to kind of stop and pause and be like, okay, we really need to look at some stuff has changed now. And I think we're circling back and really doing a good job on that again, because it's tough. You lose sight of it sometimes.
Well, again, guys, my thanks to you for joining me today for this. Before I let you go, though, are there any other comments, Win? Are there any other comments you have just regarding purchasing a truck?
I think we talked about most of them. Again, make sure that the ladder truck or anything you buy is going to fit in your firehouse, that the weight of the apparatus proposed is going to be able to respond throughout your district. I mean, don't forget about bridges, overpasses, underpasses that this thing has to fit through. And if, there's a bridge or part of your district that it can't get to because it's overweight, then this isn't the piece of apparatus for you. So make sure you do your homework on that stuff. And then, again, like we said, and I think we stressed a bunch of times, is identify what you want this apparatus to do and build your truck around that. To build it for the primary function, and then add the ancillary stuff in as it'll fit. And then, that will dictate the size of it, where things are going to go, how you're going to do things with it. And I think that's the big thing. The weight, identifying that up front, and then ensuring that it's built to the weight before you take ownership of it is 100% key. Again, we've seen that, throughout, Nick has seen it throughout the course of the fleet evaluations. And then the other thing, like Nick said, get help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. If help from, somebody in person is not what you want, there's plenty of places on the internet, fama.org, your website, the articles in your magazine, Tom Shand's articles, that are all probably easily found somewhere on the internet. Get help from something like that if you don't want to get help from a consultant. But like Nick said, get help. It's an awful lot to do, and it's an awful lot of money to spend. And, you don't want to be the head of that or chairman of that committee who makes that big mistake for the next 25 years of your fire department. And have them, using your name in vain at all the company meetings every time it comes up. So, I think that's it. I think we covered a lot of it, and, thank you for allowing us the time to do that.
Absolutely. Nick, anything you want to add before we let you go?
Yeah, I think the big thing is just educating yourself on aerial operations in general, right? Going to classes, right? FDIC's coming up. We have a lot of trade shows out there. There's a lot of people teaching a lot of things. if you've never had a ladder truck before, you should be going to operations training before you buy a ladder truck. A lot of people think we're going to get the ladder truck and then get training. Don't do that, because you need to understand how aerial operations work before you spec a ladder truck. Because like we talked about throughout the show, there are so many things that you can specify that can really mess you up and put you in a bad spot. And if you put a compartment somewhere that limits your aerial access, or you raise a roof, that's it for the next 30 years. You really can't go and just chop it off at the manufacturer and put, some duct tape on it and call it a day. That's not really how that works, right? And you could fix it, but it's just a lot of money at the end of the day once you kind of figure out you made that mistake. So getting that education beforehand, getting help specifying the rig. I mean, I can't stress that enough. We've received way too many phone calls after the fact of, the customer making a mistake, the salesman making a mistake, or the manufacturer making a mistake, and just having a non-usable rig for 30 years now. And there's nothing, once you make that phone call to us, there's really little we can do at that point. So call ahead of time to save that aggravation, and those issues really. And then lastly, get training afterward, right? Just because the state offers a class, that's not the end of it, right? There's a lot of people going out there that are sharing ideas and teaching really good stuff on how to position apparatus appropriately, and how to work with your neighbors. And just if you're an engine person and you only run engines, well, take the class anyway, because parking the engine in the right spot is helpful for the truck to get in the right spot. And so I think that's a huge component, is the training afterward, before you get the rig, after you get the rig, and everywhere in between. And just because you got the rig 5 years ago and the manufacturer came in and kind of said, here's how everything works, that's just familiarization. That's not actually training. And every 5, 10, 15 years, you should be getting training on that same rig, because things have changed. Conditions have changed. The area has changed. The knowledge has changed. You're not using it the same way every day. So bringing that person from the outside in is definitely helpful to get that refresher training and kind of get those newer operators that maybe got it third hand back to that original set of information again. But yeah, I mean, I think we covered a lot of material here, and, we're always here to help, and reach out to us or anybody. I mean, we'll always answer a phone call or an email, and feel free to answer any, questions we can, just to guide you in the right direction.
All right, perfect. Well, again, Win, Nick, thank you very much for joining me today. Nick just mentioned FDIC. What he didn't mention is that he's teaching at FDIC. So absolutely go to FDIC.com. If you're headed out there, you'll be teaching one of the classroom sessions. Go out to FDIC.com, search Wilbur. Make sure you pick Nick, not his dad. Just kidding, Nick. But his dad is going to be there too. To
He's
talk.
teaching right after me, so it's okay. You can hit
both
on the same day.
So FDIC.com, search for Wilbur, and you'll come up with his classroom session. If there is a topic you would like Nick and Win to cover with me, please let me know. Chris.McLoone@ClarionEvents.com. We're going to continue to have them on the podcast. So if there is anything you'd like us to cover, let me know. We'll get that done for you. If you had any questions that maybe didn't get answered today, like Nick just said, you can email them. You can also email me, and I'll get the message over to them. That's, again, Chris.McLoone@ClarionEvents.com. For previous podcasts, you can go to fireapparatusmagazine.com/podcasts, and all the podcasts that we've done so far are there, including the one we did a month or two ago with Nick and Win. So again, Nick, Win, thank you very much for joining me today. Again, this has been Chris Mc Loone with Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment. Have a good one and stay safe. Thanks again, guys.